Good morning or afternoon, interwebs. It's Matt Carter coming to you with a Carter's Commentaries. I've laid low for quite a while. Lots of reasons for that, but I was moved over the course of the last couple of weeks to come back and put something out there on the interwebs. So here I am. And it's going to pull in some scripture stuff based on a sermon I heard. River Point Church had Ryan Leake preach this weekend, and he was in 2 Corinthians, and that led me into some other areas of Corinthians, and prompted by a discussion earlier this week. And then a friend of mine, Georges Gaitan, many of y'all know, a long-time Houston guy that does a lot of training in the region for law enforcement, and really he's international. But he had asked why I hadn't done something like this in a while, and so here I am, George. You've helped inspire this one, and maybe I'll continue putting some of these out there. But Ryan, this morning was when I watched the sermon, and he was in 2 Corinthians, and it was referencing Paul and the thorn. We don't really know what that was. There's lots of discussion. Ryan talked a bit about that. But I always find solace in either the red letters that you find throughout the gospel or Paul's writings, because he was a non-believer and actually persecuted Christians, and then became a huge reason why the church exists today. And lots of his writings are in the gospel as a result. But if you go to 2 Corinthians 12, and he's talking about the thorn, and this is the thing that really jumped out to me, is 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9. And he says, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." And verse 10 goes on to say, "That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." And I usually will reference, especially folks that know me and know me at work. I go to Colossians a lot about serving the Lord, not human masters. And so when we're challenged, remember what the purpose is for, especially in the community and society. Certainly since 2014, I think law enforcement has been persecuted, and we've done plenty of our own to cause harm. So let's not forget that. But a small percentage of gross errors are used to really paint a broad brush of what's going on in law enforcement. So I think my brothers and sisters in law enforcement and fellow first responders have felt maligned over the last 6 to 7 years as a result, and are trying to find a source. But I was questioned as part of a process by superiors this week of what's your greatest weakness. And I think a lot of us have heard that question in the context of an interview or jobs, and I think the common sensibility is that you're supposed to articulate a weakness in a way that it's really a strength. I don't like the question. I think it's a bit foolish, because you're not, generally speaking, I think, going to get an honest answer. I'm not perfect, but I generally try to be honest and very open and transparent. And so when I'm asked that question, I have two areas that I know are weaknesses of mine, but my answer includes how I tend to address them. And the first is that I probably am seen by my peers, particularly, as often too nice, and I think that's rooted in my empathy and my compassion, and how I choose to interact as a leader with folks that in our structure are reporting to me. And I think I'm much more intrigued by ideas and people than I am by tasks. And as a result, that can give the impression to my peers, perhaps, that I am too nice to the people that report to me. And it bothers me not, but I do think that's probably how I'm seen as weak from those that know me. But a weakness I know that I have, and this is the part that I say that I think people see this as a weakness, that's the compassion too nice thing. But my weakness from inside is rooted in because I'm someone that likes to think in terms of ideas. People are more important to me than tasks. That I procrastinate. I know I do, and I've always have said for a long time. 2005, I've known that that's something in my team that I build around me, that I need finishers, and I've had those folks around me from. Those that know her, Angie Womble, to Judy Cervinka, to Megan Rivas, to Yolanda Elliott. I work with Tiffany Budnick currently, and she's another one that can put her foot in my backside to get me to finish tasks because that isn't always something I'm onto. And the concept of weakness, though, is, as I think, supposed to be spun. I just say I know how I address it in a workspace. But the truth is, we're only at work for a portion of our time. I don't think I've got a history of missing deadlines. I think I've done some things that show success, even with my tendency to procrastinate. But that's marked as you're not supposed to answer the question that way. Combined with Ryan's sermon and then these verses that I just gave to y'all, I thought. I wanted to know I wanted people to think. I'm not asking for any comments, but what is your weakness? I know that one of my weaknesses perceptively, but I certainly, I think through looking at it from a faith walk, have turned it into one of my greatest strengths and assets. It's certainly a way that I connect with people is my openness and willingness and transparency to discuss my issues with PTSD and generalized anxiety disorder. I'm very open. I train. I try to share skills and techniques that I found useful when I find new ones, as I did here in the last few weeks from a project going on at Sam Houston State University, which I'll share as well in the comments here for first responders. Another skill set in how to take more control over the way stress and anxiety that permeates throughout first responder worlds can be mitigated and managed in a proactive way instead of waiting for it to be overwhelming. So I think that tying that to this Corinthians verse here and in the conjunction of what Jesus said to Paul in a vision, and then also Paul's own words about, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me. I know I've attributed that walk of managing mental health as a health issue has provided this great purpose in my life over the last 10, 11 years as I've struggled. And when I look at May 2nd and then May 22nd and August 25th, dates on the calendar that are really striking for me with elements of what has prompted me to be overwhelmed with stress into anxiety as a disorder and post-trauma stress as a disorder. I've turned it into, or really, the good Lord giving me a vehicle and an avenue to share on that has turned that into a strength. And I think particularly in the first responder community, we're so hesitant to talk about weaknesses so that we don't appear weak. We give this front of being strong, and being strong too long, too often can end up creating fractures in our well-being that we have difficulty addressing that. We are in a culture or subculture of stigma driven that weakness is rooted in mental health problems, and mental health problems are a sign of that weakness. And I have tried to flip that script. And I think that's part of perhaps why one of my weaknesses viewed from the outside is you're too nice, or you're too compassionate, or it doesn't matter what they got going on, they still have a job to do. It's not a philosophy I adhere to. I get, and we've had separations resulted in people not able to do the job or no longer able to do the job. It's not something I embrace, but I don't want to label absenteeism as a start point. Well, that's problematic when there's probably a stress or an anxiety root behind it. So I think that while my peers, meaning mid and upper level command, might look at that as a potential weakness, I know it is endearing to those that are in those struggles, because I've been that person in the struggle and been afraid to talk. So here's some rambling for 10 minutes for me to get to this point. Going into that scripture, 2 Corinthians 12, 8, 9, 10, 11, if you like, to get into his concern. But 8, 9, and 10 are really where this is rooted from Paul and his vision from Jesus to deal with what his weakness was and how God's using that weakness. And so what is your weakness? Have you looked at that? We are quick to look at our strengths and know what we do well and amplify those. But I'm going to ask you to examine that for yourself. What is that weakness, and how is God going to make use of that weakness to be a strength, to kind of fill that void that you think is a weakness? That's where Christ steps in. And I'm empowered by that over the sequence of the last few weeks. Brought me to being in front of the camera and putting something out there again. So hopefully there's a message in here that someone benefits from, and that's all I ever want to be, is a light in someone's world today. And let your weakness be known. Embrace that Christ can fill the gaps that you think exist in that weakness. Know that you are loved. I love you. Take care of yourselves. Be well. Be healthy.